Ahead of South African President Cyril Ramaphosa's upcoming State of the Nation address, over 400 people, including members of civil society organizations, unemployed citizens, and recipients of the Social Relief of Distress Grant, marched to the head offices of the South African Social Security Agency and the union buildings in Pretoria on Thursday. The government has introduced the SRD grant in May 2020 during the COVID pandemic. Since then, the grant has been repeatedly extended and is now due to expire next month. The marchers want Ramaphosa to clearly lay out the state's plan for a basic income grant at his State of the Union address next week. More protests in South Africa regarding Eskom. Angry residents and members of civil society organizations on Thursday marched to Eskom's head office, Megawatt Park in Sunninghill, to protest against load shedding and the 18% electricity tariff hike, which will take effect from April.
And the recovery of outstanding debts from citizens, municipalities and businesses that are not paying. Eskom has to improve its debt collection. Why is it that some municipalities don't pay and yet the lights are on? And then Eskom complains they don't have money. And then they go and ask for 18%. Why don't you go to nearby municipality there and there? You know them.
All right, still on Eskom, the board plans to scrap the position of Chief Operating Officer. This was confirmed by Director Mteo Natsi at a briefing on Thursday. Jan Oberholzer was appointed as the utility's first COO in 2018. He retires in April. The board has decided to cancel the position, given that Eskom will be unbundled into 3 divisions: generation, transmission, and distribution. Sanyade Okoli, CEO, Alpha African Advisory, joins us to discuss further. Good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. South Africa is one of my favorite topics. This COO, this removal of the COO, what do you make of it? I mean, should they have kept him? I mean, from even from a cost savings perspective, could they have kept one COO to go to oversee the 3 subdivisions? What do you think?
Well, let's consider the story that was before. In fact, in some ways, you have to consider all the stories because they're all interlinked in a way. People are protesting about the fact that there's going to be a rise in the tariffs for electricity.
Yeah.
You have serious load shedding issues, which is having, as you know, economic implications on GDP growth, economic activity, cost of doing business, etc. The load shedding, some of it is due to, some would say, mismanagement, a plethora of issues.
Yeah.
So the question I have is, if you don't replace the COO, in an organization that clearly needs a lot of help for it to operate as effectively and as efficiently as it needs to, then who's taking over his responsibilities? Who's having that oversight view of pulling together all the disparate bits to ensure Eskom delivers what it needs to, especially if it's asking people to pay more?
Speaking of which, they're protesting 18%. Eskom wanted about 32 or 33. What do you make of that? What does that say about the revenue challenges for them?
I think it's a case of lack of self-awareness on both parts, in that you're doing load shedding, et cetera, and you're raising the price. But the reason they need to raise the tariff is, as you know, revenues are low. They've just spoken about debt collection issues. They need to reinvest in the plant and equipment. Government's been funding the issues, but government's running at a deficit. You can't have the tariffs where it used to be,
right? But
you have to be reasonable in your ask.
If every African citizen in every African country that was facing blackouts, Nigeria included, protested, would we get anything done? What do you think?
Here's another perspective. Maybe if we were protesting more, we might actually
get more things done.
But honestly, sitting where I am right now in Nigeria, we're protesting or we're struggling with lack of cash, which you've just covered, lack of fuel, struggling to get our PVCs, quote unquote, the struggle is real. The last thing we want is additional tensions on protests with different things. And then, sadly, I think we're also used to, we've become deadened to not having electricity. Numb, that's the word. We've used to as we say in Nigeria, manage it like that. And, that's, it's not good.
Another protest still in South Africa. This is on the cost of living. That grant that was introduced during COVID, the living grant, I think it's 130 rand. They want it to be 1,100. I mean, want to quadruple it. Is that reasonable considering we're just talking about revenue challenges now for South Africa?
Did I mention self-awareness
challenges? Yeah, right. So this is on the protester side?
Yes, well, look, to be fair to them, unemployment numbers have been rising.
Right.
So you're dealing with real issues. We know what the global impact of war, et cetera, has been on inflation. So people are struggling. But government deficit is an issue.
Yeah.
Government debt has been rising. So there are limitations to what they can fund. As with so many of the economies, I keep coming back to Nigeria because some of the issues are so live.
Yeah.
Economy. You need to drive growth. You need private sector to drive the growth required to ensure that you're creating the jobs that you need to ensure that the companies are earning enough to generate profits, to pay taxes. It's all interlinked. And you need the electricity to enable the private sector to drive the growth.
Right.
We can't just chillax.
Gotcha.
We need to pull it all together.
Gotcha. And speaking of pulling it all together, can Ramaphosa afford to ignore these protests in his State of the Union address next week?
Absolutely not.
Yeah, he's got to say something.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Let's now move to the South African Tourism Board and this whole matter with this 1 billion rand going to, I think they said they've preliminary approval for it with Tottenham and everything, the CFO being linked. Well, what do you, first of all, I mean, 1 billion rand, they're saying it'll come back. You heard the CEO in that clip saying, what do you make of it?
It was interesting. His response to the leak was, I think, certainly not a measured response.
He sounded very upset.
Very upset about the leak. So it's not that that you're saying we're going to do it. It's like, you shouldn't know we're going to do it, and certainly not so early. And he's saying that, they heard it out of context. Some of the other response they've been getting is to say, look, channel that money to electricity. If we could address the electricity issues, that might help with the tourism. And he's saying, well, it's different pots. And then there's a counter argument that even if it's different pots, why are you spending so much on just one project?
Right.
And then there's a thing of, but there's the CFO, the acting,
is linked to the so there's something more happening.
Need I say more?
Well, but in general, South Africa's tourism though, and look, full disclosure, the tourism board, I think it was late last year, they actually came on this show. I mean, they've done this whole global thing where they're going across Africa trying to promote themselves. It's important to the economy and so on and so forth. But with all of South Africa's problems, I mean, it's still a beautiful country and still attracting quite a number of tourists, is it not? So what's your, as far as tourism importance?
So you're right.
Yeah.
Tourism is important as a percentage of GDP. It has declined. But, of course, we all suffered COVID.
It's a nice acronym you put together there. Yeah.
And their numbers haven't recovered. But I'm sure many countries, their numbers haven't recovered. And given the importance to the economy, I can see why they need to drive numbers back up. But the question is, for every rand spent, where's the best place to invest that money?
Right.
What are the best projects that will yield the highest returns in terms of increased numbers, increased spend, increased GDP, increased tax revenues, and sponsoring one Premier League football club?
Right.
I think for most people do not think that that's the best use of money.
So basically, South Africa has to prioritize.
Absolutely.
They really do.
Absolutely.
You sound like an advisor, and that's what you do. That's what you do for a living. Sanyade Okoli, CEO, Alpha African Advisory. Thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate your time.